Is this the will? I need something better. How am I supposed to pay the mortgage? This is unacceptable.
Frank Delgado stood outside a locked office door holding a promise he had carried for 22 years, a promise he had never once said out loud to the only man who ever deserved to hear it. That man was gone now, and the only thing Frank had left of him was a business collapsing from the inside, a grieving son who trusted no one, and a debt that money could never repay. Frank did not know yet that inside that building, someone had already decided exactly how far they would go to make sure he never got the chance to keep his word. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The town of Millbrook, Ohio did not have much to offer. A diner on Main Street, a hardware store with a bell above the door, a church with a steeple that leaned a little further west every winter. But Millbrook had one thing people drove hours to see. For 30 years, Walt Ashford ran the finest classic car restoration shop in 3 counties, a place where rusted-out wrecks came back to life under his hands, where customers left feeling less like clients and more like family. Then, on a wet Tuesday evening in October, Walt Ashford's truck left Route 9 in the rain, and he never made it to the hospital. He left behind a shop full of memories, a town full of people who loved him, and one son who had no idea how to carry any of it forward. Tyler Ashford was 23 years old when his father died. Home from a business degree he never finished, far more interested in car payments than car engines. He had grown up comfortable, surrounded by everything his father's success could buy, but he had never once turned a wrench in his life. When the will was read, Tyler expected a payout. Instead, he inherited a garage, 40 employees, a mortgage on the building, and a reputation he had absolutely no idea how to protect. He resented every piece of it almost immediately, and within a year, he had gone through 7 different shop managers, each one leaving faster than the last, each departure quietly rotting the business his father had spent 3 decades building from nothing. The first manager quit after Tyler screamed at her in front of a paying customer over a quote he decided was too generous. The second left the same week Tyler took a torch to a customer's half-finished restoration simply because he was bored and wanted to see what would happen. The third did not even make it through his first lunch break before walking out the front door for good. Mechanics who had worked at that shop for 15 years started calling in sick more and more often, and then, one by one, they stopped calling in at all. The parking lot that used to be full by 7 in the morning sat half empty by 9, and everyone in Millbrook noticed, because in a town this small, everyone always notices. The fourth manager, a soft-spoken man named Curtis, actually lasted 3 weeks, which was practically a record. He had managed a tire chain for a decade and believed he had seen every kind of difficult boss a person could work for. He had not. Tyler once made him reprint a customer invoice 4 separate times over a font he did not like, then blamed Curtis publicly the moment the customer complained about the delay. Curtis left a folded resignation letter on the desk one morning and did not say goodbye to a single person on his way out. The fifth manager quit on the very same day she started, the moment she watched Tyler dock a mechanic's pay for what he called attitude, after the man had politely asked him to stop leaning on a freshly painted hood. The sixth manager did not even bother resigning. He simply stopped showing up one Monday morning, stopped answering his phone entirely, and was later spotted working behind the counter at an auto parts store 2 towns over, visibly relieved every single time someone asked him why he had left. The seventh manager was a retired mechanic named Sal, a man who had known Walt personally and taken the job purely out of respect for his memory. Sal lasted exactly 5 minutes. He walked in on a Monday morning, watched Tyler hurl a stapler across the office at a terrified assistant over a misfiled form, turned around without a single word, and walked straight back out the door. He mailed his uniform back a week later with no note attached at all. Word travels fast in a town of 4,000 people, and it was not long before Cortland Auto Group heard exactly what was happening inside the walls of Ashford's garage. Cortland was a regional chain with 12 locations and an aggressive appetite for expansion. A company known throughout the state for buying up struggling family businesses for a fraction of what they were worth. Their regional director, a smooth-talking man named Rick Voss, began showing up at the diner where Tyler ate lunch most afternoons, friendly at first, then increasingly persistent as the weeks passed. He always seemed to know exactly how the numbers were trending before Tyler did, and exactly when to appear with another folder in hand. "We're not vultures," Voss told him once, sliding a folder across the table with a practiced, easy smile. "We're a lifeline. Your numbers are bad, Tyler, and they're only getting worse. At some point, you won't have a choice left to make." Tyler did not particularly like Rick Voss, but he liked the number printed inside that folder even less, because it kept shrinking every single month, and he could not begin to explain why. What Tyler did not know, what nobody sitting in that diner had the faintest idea of, was that 7 managers walking out that door in less than a year had never really been about his temper at all. Somebody, somewhere, had been making absolutely certain of that. Frank Delgado had never once set foot in Millbrook, Ohio, but he knew the name Ashford better than almost anyone left alive. 22 years earlier, in a supply convoy just outside Kandahar, a young soldier named Walt Ashford had pulled Frank Delgado out of a burning vehicle seconds before it went up entirely in flames. Frank had carried that debt in his chest every single day since, a weight he had never once found the right moment to set down. They stayed close after coming home, trading letters, the occasional visit, a running joke about Frank someday learning to fix a car the proper way. Then life happened the way it always does, and somehow an entire decade slipped quietly between phone calls. Frank found out about the accident 3 weeks after it happened, from an old Army friend who noticed the obituary printed in a regional newspaper. He sat alone in his kitchen in Columbus for 2 full days before he could bring himself to speak a single word about it to anyone. Then he did the only thing that made any sense to him at all. He packed one duffel bag, climbed into his truck, and drove straight to Millbrook without a plan and without an invitation. He was not coming for a job. He was coming because he owed a dead man a debt no amount of money could ever repay. And the only piece of Walt Ashford left in this world was a broken business and a son who had no idea what he had truly lost. Frank walked into the shop on a quiet Monday morning wearing a plain jacket and a pair of worn steel-toe boots, carrying nothing but a folder holding his old service record and a mechanic certification earned years after he retired. He said nothing at all about Walt. Not yet. The front office looked like a storm had recently torn straight through it. Invoices left unopened, coffee cups scattered across every surface. A young man sat behind the desk with his boots propped up, scrolling through his phone, wearing a jacket that likely cost more than most of the trucks parked outside. "We're not hiring," Tyler said, without even bothering to glance up from his screen. "Sign outside says otherwise," Frank replied, his voice even and unbothered. Tyler finally looked up, and something about the older man's stillness irritated him instantly, though he could not have explained exactly why. Most people who walked through that door were either desperate for work or desperate to sell him something. This man appeared to be neither. "You ever run a shop floor before?" Tyler asked, testing him the way he tested everyone. 22 years managing logistics for the United States Army, Frank answered plainly. "I can run your shop floor in my sleep." Tyler almost laughed out loud. Almost. But something steady in Frank's voice made the laugh die quietly in his throat before it ever fully arrived. "Fine," Tyler said finally, mostly just to watch this stranger fail like all the rest. "You start tomorrow. First one who quits on me gets absolutely nothing. You understand that? Frank nodded once, calm and unreadable. Understood. He did not tell Tyler who he truly was that day. Not the connection to his father, not the promise he had driven 3 states to keep. He simply lifted a set of keys off the cluttered desk, looked around at the wreckage of that office, and quietly got to work. That first day, Frank did 3 things nobody inside that building expected from him. He reorganized inventory that had sat in chaos for months, personally called every customer whose job had been delayed, and sat with each mechanic to ask what they actually needed. Nobody had thought to ask them that in well over a year. By the end of that first week, 2 mechanics who had already made up their minds to quit found themselves quietly changing course, though neither one bothered to explain why to Tyler, and Tyler never thought to ask. The shop did not feel any different yet. Not really. Not in any way a stranger walking past on Main Street would have noticed. But something small had shifted underneath the surface, the kind of shift that takes weeks to become visible and years to fully understand. Frank Delgado had not come to Millbrook to save a business. He had come to keep a promise. The business, as it turned out, would simply be the way he kept it. By the second Wednesday, Tyler had decided it was time to test him properly. There was a 1969 Camaro sitting in Bay 3, a customer's late father's car, mid-restoration, worth far more in memory than it was in dollars, though it carried plenty of both. Tyler had been bored the entire morning, restless in the way he always got when nobody was watching him closely enough. He walked into the bay, picked up a grinder that was never his to touch, and dragged it clean across the freshly primed hood, just to see what this new man would actually do about it. The mechanics froze where they stood. Word of what had happened spread through that shop in under 2 minutes flat. Frank walked into the bay, looked at the long gouge torn across the hood, and said absolutely nothing for a long, uncomfortable stretch of silence. "You gonna yell?" Tyler asked, arms folded, almost daring him to. "No," Frank said simply. He walked calmly to the front office, printed an invoice, and set it directly on Tyler's desk. Full material and labor cost for the repair, $3,200, billed personally to Tyler Ashford, not to the business. "What is this?" Tyler snapped, snatching the paper up. "You damaged shop property and a customer's vehicle," Frank said evenly. "That comes out of your pocket, not the company's." "I own the business," Tyler shot back. "Then the business is exactly what I'm protecting," Frank said quietly. "Not you." Tyler tore the invoice cleanly in half and stormed out of the office without another word. But that night, alone in his apartment, he found himself staring at the torn pieces taped carefully back together on his kitchen counter, angrier than he could fully explain and completely unable to say why it bothered him so much. The next morning, he tried a different approach entirely. He gathered the whole crew for a meeting he had never once bothered holding before, announcing loudly that changes were coming and that Frank's military nonsense would not be tolerated in a real shop. Then he assigned Frank the single most miserable job he could think of, a full engine teardown that 3 separate mechanics had already refused outright. Frank did not argue. He spent the entire day alone in Bay 1, working through a stripped bolt that had defeated every tool in that building, with a level of patience the younger mechanics had genuinely never witnessed applied to a piece of rusted hardware before. By 6 that evening, the bolt was out, the teardown was finished, and Frank had quietly left a typed parts list on Tyler's desk without a single word of complaint attached to it. The next morning, Tyler mocked his slow, methodical process in front of the entire crew, calling him old man in front of everyone. Frank simply kept working, and by the following morning, he had finished restoring a customer's supposedly unsalvageable 1968 Mustang overnight, a job 3 previous managers had all called impossible. When that customer arrived the next afternoon and broke down in tears at the sight of his father's fully restored car sitting in the bay, Tyler watched quietly from the office window and said nothing to a single person for the rest of that day. He tried spreading a rumor to the remaining mechanics that Frank was skimming parts on the side, but nobody believed a word of it, because Frank had already quietly covered a mechanic's medical bill out of his own pocket the week before, after learning the man's daughter had been in the hospital. That mechanic, a quiet man named Ray, told 2 others, and within a single day, the entire shop knew the truth, and Tyler's rumor died before it ever truly had the chance to spread. He tried once more, quietly canceling a parts delivery behind Frank's back, hoping to make him look incompetent in front of an important customer. Frank had already placed a backup order as a contingency, an old habit built from 22 years of logistics work, and the job went out exactly on time, the customer never any wiser to what had almost happened. Nothing Tyler tried worked, and that unsettled him far more than any single failure ever could have on its own. For the very first time in over a year, someone inside that building was not afraid of him, was not trying desperately to please him, and was not preparing quietly to leave. And somewhere beneath all that anger, a small and uncomfortable thought had already begun to take root inside him. Nobody at the shop ever saw Tyler come back most nights. He told himself he was only stopping by to check on things, nothing more. In truth, he had started parking 2 full streets away so nobody would ever recognize his car sitting outside after hours. He would let himself in through the side door around 11, switch on a single work light above Bay 2, and pull out a battered repair manual he had ordered online under a name that was not his own, terrified that someone at the local hardware store might recognize him buying it in person. Slowly, clumsily, and entirely alone, he taught himself the very things his father had tried teaching him 100 times as a boy, back when Tyler thought all of it was beneath him. He never told a single soul. He was deeply ashamed to admit that at 24 years old, he did not know how to do the one thing his own father had built an entire life and legacy around. The first night, he stripped a spark plug thread trying to remove it, and spent nearly 40 minutes silently panicking that he had ruined a customer's engine, before finally realizing, with a wave of relief that embarrassed him more than he expected, that it was only an old junked block Frank kept around for spare parts. The second night, he managed to change a set of brake pads correctly on his 3rd attempt, and sat alone afterward in that empty garage, staring down at his own greasy hands like they somehow belonged to a stranger. What Tyler never realized was that Frank noticed everything. Frank always arrived first and left last, an old habit that 22 years in the Army had never fully let go of. One morning he found the work light still faintly warm to the touch, tools set down in a pattern that was not quite right, but was not quite wrong either, the unmistakable pattern of someone slowly learning. Frank said absolutely nothing about it. But the following night, he simply forgot to lock the parts cabinet. The night after that, a torque wrench sat exactly where it needed to be, correct settings written carefully on a strip of masking tape. Small, quiet gestures. No lecture, no confrontation. Only a door left open for a proud young man who could not yet bring himself to ask for help. One evening, Tyler arrived to find a single sticky note left on the workbench, written in unfamiliar handwriting. Bleed sequence starts at the wheel farthest from the master cylinder. Most people get it backwards their very first time. Tyler read that note 4 separate times before he truly understood what it meant, that Frank had known all along exactly what he was doing out there alone at night, and had chosen quietly to help him without ever once forcing him to admit he needed it. Tyler never mentioned the note to anyone, not even Frank. But he started coming back to that garage more and more often after that, and slowly, without either one of them ever saying so out loud, something inside that building had genuinely begun to change for the better. The shouting grew quieter with each passing week. Customer complaints slowed to almost nothing at all. One afternoon, an elderly man picking up his freshly restored truck shook Tyler's hand firmly and told him his father would be proud of this shop, and Tyler had to excuse himself into the back office so nobody could see the look on his face. A week later, for the first time since his father's funeral, Tyler arrived to a staff meeting right on time, sat quietly through the entire thing without interrupting once, and at the very end, in front of every single person in that room, said simply, "Thank you for sticking around. I know I have not made that easy on any of you." Nobody said a word back. Ray gave him a small, quiet nod on his way out the door, and it meant more to Tyler than he ever expected it could. But even as the shop around him slowly began to heal, Frank had started noticing something else entirely, something that had absolutely nothing to do with Tyler's attitude at all. Late one evening, long after everyone else had gone home, Frank sat alone in the front office running his finger down a column of numbers that simply refused to add up no matter how many times he checked them. A delivery invoice that did not match what had actually arrived. A parts order bill that nearly doubled the going rate. A recurring payment leaving the business every single month, made out to a name Frank did not recognize at all. He sat back slowly in his chair, and for the first time since arriving in Millbrook, a quiet, unfamiliar unease settled deep into his chest.